Alright, so today I was going to go and do a tutorial for DakTank, like this time a modern one instead of like a few-year-old one, no black magic or anything. Uh, so yeah, first thing you want to do is just spawn a prop. This will be the base plate. Uh, so let's see, I'll just get like a normal prop actually, something that's vaguely tank size, so like just seems good enough. Doesn't really matter which direction we're building in. But yeah, this is going to be the base plate. You're going to need one of those for any tank you make. Step 2 is just, you kind of want to get a gate next. That's kind of like the thing you're going to have to parent everything to, so I just like get one of those, put it on. So basically the gate is the only thing that gets parented to the hull. So one thing you need to know about this is, by default, like the wired developers have it set up not to be parented, but you actually want it parented all the time. So first thing you want to do is actually click this, make sure it's parented, and then click it right there. But if you didn't have it parented when you did that, you're just going to have to go to the parent tool, and, well, multi-parent tool, and just click it and then parent it on. But yeah, everything else though, we actually parent it to the gate instead of the base plate. So pretty much all you really need to make DakTank stuff move is, usually I'm going to go with the auto tread gearboxes. They're newer, they're easier, they have a lot of quality of life improvements. The regular gearboxes are kind of old. They're mostly only for people who want to do really specific stuff with it. I wouldn't really recommend them. So I'm going to put a gearbox on the back, just a standard one. It has some power rating limits and stuff. So yeah, as you'll see, that pops up some treads. We don't really need them right there yet, but so one thing to note is that the treads are actually parented to the gearbox, but after you parent the gearbox down to the base plate, they'll actually be based off of the center of mass of the base plate, so I'll do that now. So you can see it hasn't moved yet, but basically once you copy paste it still won't do that. So you actually have to have the Tankcore up before it actually does that. But yeah, we don't need to move that just yet. So next up, we're going to put an engine and some fuel on it. This has like 300 power. This is a rating of like 600 as you read earlier, but I'm just going to put 1. Just make sure you stay below that limit or else it's going to be wasting power. Oh yeah, the other thing too is it needs like 180 liters of fuel. So the standard fuel tank has 180 liters of fuel. Just gonna parent those on. You can barely see the crosshair of this. Yeah. So now that we got the gearbox, engine, fuel, all that stuff, we're gonna need a tank core. So the tank core is actually the thing that does everything on the tank, well, at least most of it. You just have one of those, parent it on. If you don't parent it on, within 30 seconds it'll yell at you to do that, so I'd recommend just doing what it says. Yeah. So once you have that done, it'll actually do the calculations at some point after you copy-paste it. But, yeah. So let me just do that now. So yeah, as you can see now, it's moved the treads over. You can see the info scanner pop up. You can see an analysis complete for it, and it'll show like debugging information, like there's no driver, there's not enough crew, it doesn't have any turrets, just some other stuff like that. Now, if you were to unfreeze it like this, it'll explode. Watch this. Yeah, the reason it does that is because we don't have any crew on the vehicle. DakTank is a system set around like a game mode where like if you're playing it and you don't happen to have any crew left, you'll die. So it's sort of like War Thunder in a way. You need to have at least 2 crew members or else the vehicle won't function. And the main thing a crew member does, like the top priority jobs there, is driver, and then after that, gunner of the heaviest turret. And then after that is loaders, and then you can have passengers that aren't really doing anything, but will go and take jobs if there's one available. I'm going to add in some crew members now, just a couple people sitting down over here. Look at that, they have like custom colors set whenever you spawn them, look at that. Diversity quotas are met. But yeah, just going to parent those guys on. Now we have the crew, but also, yeah, we'll go to the DakTank linker here. So what you want to do is select a crew member like this guy here, and then right click, and now he's linked to the gearbox. He'll be the driver. You can only have one driver at a time, but you know, if he dies, somebody else will take his place if there's somebody available. So yeah, that'll do it for like this tank here. You can just copy paste it, and now it should actually not explode when we unfreeze it. And look at that, it didn't blow up. That's actually pretty good. Now watch it blow up. Didn't draw it fast enough. But yeah. Anyway, next up we're going to want to put probably a seat on it, I guess. If you want to drive around, that would be kind of useful. So in DakTank, the seats actually don't matter to the game mode. You're actually pretty much ethereal as a player if you're in a vehicle. I'm only really counting the crew as like the people in it. So you can put the seat anywhere, you can clip it with anything, I don't really care. Just parent it on to something. Usually I'd actually recommend parenting it onto the turret, just so that like your player is facing the direction of like the turret pointing, but it really doesn't actually matter. So yeah, next up we're gonna do the wiring of stuff, well, at least some of it, like just to get it moving. So you're gonna want a camera controller. Here's the settings on it. Like, I think that's right. I had a bunch of more settings while I wasn't looking. I don't really know, but yeah, this seems pretty good. Smooth speed set to like as low as possible, else stuff will probably break. So yeah, just link that over to the seat. All you do is right click it and right click it, and then you're gonna want a pod controller. Same thing, right click to the seat. And yeah. Sometimes these aren't parented by default, so you just want to parent those to the gate, just in case. And, yeah, that's pretty much it. Next up, you probably need a camera controller. I'll include one of those in the description. So, let's see. Cam controller. And that's not what I called it. I called it camera chip. If I can spell for a second here. There we go. And yeah, just place one of those down. There's some information on the inside here, like revision 13 information, like important information, all that stuff. I don't really care. Just you can set the settings up. First person is based off of like the position of like the seat, or like, yeah, I think it's based off the seat in this one. And then third person is based off of just like the position of the base plate. So you're gonna want to change those at some point if you want to tune your camera settings. But yeah, also just once again parent this one to the gate. Usually just stops any potential problems from happening. And wire it up. So this one, wire it to the pod. This is the pod controller over here. Camera controller, wire to that. Scope. Scope is the zoom in key, so I'm just going to put it to light, which is F on my keyboard. Camera controller, no, cam toggle. I'll just set it to alt. It swaps between first and third person. The base is the base plate. So the base plate's right there. And now activate on the camera controller. It goes to active on the pod, not whatever I just wired it to. None of these have to be wired except for FOV, which goes to the zoom input on the camera controller. And yeah, that's about it. Just copy paste that. I don't really need to save it right now unless it was going to crash. Let's just hope it doesn't crash while I'm making this tutorial. That would be not good. So yeah, get into the vehicle and you can see here's the first person view at the base plate. Oh yeah, it's based off of the base plate now when you wire base rather than the seat. Yeah, but anyway, I pressed Alt, here's third person view. Nothing is wired for the control, so you can hear me just... yeah, none of that works. But if you do want it to work, you actually have to wire it up, which is actually kind of simple. So all this stuff here, you don't really need most of this stuff. Forward-facing entities, just in case you don't have the gearbox pointed forward, but I mostly do. So yeah, don't really need that. This isn't a car, so I don't have to activate that. But if I did make a car, I would just wire car turning up to like something that's 1 or above. Anyway, forward, I'm just going to make it WASD control, so forward, reverse, left, and right. Brakes I'll put up to the space bar. Activate, active on the power controller so it turns on when I get in. And there we go. That's all I need out of that. Does seem it isn't really forward pointing exactly, so I might actually want to wire to something that's facing forward. Currently nothing is facing forward though, but we do have something that I do need to put facing forward, and that's actually a good segue over to the turret controller. So the turret controller is something that, you see the little arrow on this, that actually determines the default angle of the turret. So I'm going to get precision alignment here. You don't actually have to use precision alignment. You could like manually turn it, but this is pretty easy. So precision alignment, right click to make it blue, press R, go to rotation. You can get the angles here. Currently it spawns at 0 direction everywhere, but since our base plate isn't pointed that way because I didn't even check, I'm just going to turn it to 90. 90 isn't the right way though. You can see the arrow pointed backwards, so I'm going to do -90, and there we go. So yeah, pointing forward. So now that we have something on this vehicle that's pointed forward, I'm going to tell the gearbox that this is the forward facing entity. And there we go. Did it change it yet? Yeah, it actually did. So yeah, you can see that's actually level now. And yeah, so now we could just do gearbox settings. I guess that would be a good idea if you want to drive it around. So hold down C, then right click on the gearbox, and you can see there's this big list of stuff. A lot of it's just extra details and stuff. You might not need them all, but let's go through some of the stuff you might need. So currently top speed bias is at 100. This means it's going to be like max top speed and really low acceleration. If you want to accelerate fast, I'd recommend just lowering it all the way down. That's actually pretty good usually. So suspension give is how much, like, if you go over something, how fast is it going to react to it. Usually default 100 is pretty alright. And suspension bias is like how much the bias forward and backwards is on the suspension. Like if you were tilting or something, just use that. But usually if your vehicle is pretty decently even, you don't really need to. Brake turning stiffness is just how hard the brake turns when you press the like left or right. So I'm just going to leave that alone. Suspension damping you might need sometimes. It's how bouncy it is. 0.25 is kind of bouncy. If you wanted to go all the way up, it would be like really stable. And then suspension force multiplier is just multiplying the overall force of the suspension. Then you have your dimensions. You can kind of like extend the tracks or make them really short or whatever you want to do with them. So I'll just leave it at like default 200. That looked about right. And then the offset for the tracks is like how far off to the sides do you want them. So like pretty much like that. That's pretty good. And ground clearance. That's what we kind of need right now since we have none. So I'm just going to drop them on down a little, and that's pretty good. And then there's forward offset. This is what I was saying earlier, how like if you have it a little too far forward, you might need the suspension bias to like push it back, but if you're at 0, you usually can leave it at 0 on that, unless you have some weird weights going on somewhere. Oh yeah, and then we can set the wheels per side. I really don't need that many wheels. Most people don't need that many wheels. You probably shouldn't use that many wheels. But yeah, we're just going to leave it at 7 default. Oh yeah, and then if you want to raise the front wheel up, yeah, there we go. And then the back wheel, yeah, there we go. Got those sound effects. Wheel model, if you want to set it to something that isn't the default. I don't, so I'm not going to do that. Wheel width, in case you think like foot wide wheels are a little like too puny. There you go. You can get your wide rims or whatever. And diameter. I'm just going through all this. It's going to be kind of slow, you know, but like, you know, if you want to have all the information. But yeah, wheel diameter, big versus not big. You can do it on like the front too if you want. Like here's a tiny front wheel. Look at it, tiny. But yeah, wheel color. That's self-explanatory. And yeah, body groups. Like sometimes wheels have different things like rims or whatever, and then like sprockets and nothing in this slot. You can tell it to have a sprocket on the front or on the back. I have one on the front. And yeah, what does offset wheel y'all do? Oh yeah, that's if like the wheels were sideways. Sometimes they are, but in this case they aren't. And yeah, tread width. You can make sure your treads aren't all thin and weird looking, so you can just be like a little bit more. There we go. And now they look sort of decent, I would say. And tread thickness, if you want your treads to be like pieces of paper. Or, why did I let it go that much? Yeah, so you can just kind of set them to whatever thickness you want, and the color, you've already seen how colors work. At least I hope you have. And yeah, this isn't a wheeled vehicle, but if it was, it just gets rid of the tread, pretty much. And you can set how many wheels are for turning in the front and back and the turn angle if you're a car. And then you can do like really specific tuning of each wheel, like if I wanted that wheel on the back there in particular to be more forward or back or not. But I don't, so I'm just going to leave it as it is. So yeah, we kind of have like a tread looking thing here, and it's all wired and stuff, and I think that should actually do it for making it work or not. I'm just going to put that down. And here we go. Oh, that's a lot of horsepower per ton. That's like 160. This thing's gonna like... Well, usually doesn't do that. Don't know what's going on with that. Probably because it's really low weight, and something might be weighing it down. Probably because one of these camera controllers or something is partially welded and it's like heavy enough to push it down. So I'm just going to increase the weight of the base plate. Let's say 500. 500 sounds good, and that will reduce the horsepower per ton so it doesn't like just be a jet engine. Apparently didn't really reduce it that much, but yeah. Still doing that. That is new. We are getting bugs as we test. Wonder how that happened. What happens if we get into it? Well, it is turning. But the gearbox, well, if it's going forward and backwards, but what is the gearbox basing its direction off of? That is odd. Let's see if I can fix this. So oh, I see what happened. This is one of those stupid bugs. It's where we did a user error. You remember how we wired it up to the turret controller, and you see how the turret controller isn't there. And you remember how I mentioned on like everything, oh yeah, we should probably parent it on? Yeah, I forgot to do the whole parenting it on thing. Right when I needed to most. Yeah, that's how it happens. Happens to the best of us. And the worst of us. But yeah, just parent that on and it should all work fine now. Just gotta give it a moment. Yeah, that was it. Keeping that one in. So yeah, now you can just spin really fast. This thing has 160 horsepower per ton. Hopefully you shouldn't really be going that fast. And like, look at that, spurging out and stuff. The base plate is not enough for this much force on it, but yeah, crew members are like dying of G-forces. Alright, so now that we've seen what you shouldn't be doing on mobility, but also still able to get it to work, that's basically it. Next up, you're probably going to want a turret, because guns and stuff are kind of cool on tanks. So it's actually pretty simple, but does have a process. So yeah, just have a base plate for your turret. I'm going to put it over here. It doesn't really matter exactly where you place it. And next up, you want an aimer prop for your gun. Generally, I'll just go into like games, all, and go to the DakTank folder. and then from here I just like pick a random gun, usually like a small one, like say a cannon that's 25 millimeters long. There we go. So basically the smallest cannon. This is a really old cannon model, so it's not really used anymore, but I just like it as an aimer prop. It points forward, it looks like a general gun, so it gives me an idea of which direction is the right direction. So yeah, just put that anywhere, like here is fine. Basically, what the aimer prop does is, so your gun here has a pivot point on a turret, so like the turret will rotate around 360, but here's the pivot point of the aimer prop. So like, if you were to put your gun somewhere on this, you can put the gun anywhere, but as long as it's parented to this aimer prop here, this will be the pivot point. So that's kind of why that's required. Still haven't thought of an easier way to allow people to make a pivot point yet. But yeah, anyway, you're going to want a gun, so here's some weapons. Guess I should go over some of the stuff about the weapons here too. So there's 3 different types of loading mechanisms. There's like belt-fed, which is stuff like grenade launchers, autocannons, heavy machine guns, and regular machine guns. I guess flamethrowers, not really a belt, but like a pipe. But yeah, so it's basically belt-fed. They don't need any loading area around them. And then next up is auto-loaders. You can say all the auto-loading stuff and auto-loader stuff is just like they need a reload area, but only behind them. And it goes up based off the caliber. Then you have regular guns that are just manually loaded. So they have a reload area, but it's in all directions. So basically just however much space you have around them, the faster you'll reload up until a point. And the closer the ammo is to the breach, as it says right here in the description, if somebody actually reads that, it actually makes it reload faster. You also need a certain amount of loaders. It goes up based off of how big your shell is. But yeah, I'm just going to go and use, let's say, an auto-loader here. That way I can show people how carousels and regular mags work too. So yeah, I'm just going to go and get a 50mm auto-loading cannon. That's basic enough. You can see here's an actual good cannon model compared to this thing. This is what you call a placeholder. But yeah, I'm just going to put this over here. Keep it nice and simple. Also, let me get rid of that. So here, you can edit properties, and you can actually raise and lower the propellant of any gun. And on any of the automatic guns or autoloaders, you can actually change the rate of fire. Anything below 1. This will make it fire slower, of course, but that also reduce the cost of the vehicle since it's lower damage per second or whatever. And then, of course, propellant if you just want it to go slower, which will actually lower pin on some of the like piercing rounds. So yeah. Now that we have that, we need ammo for it. So we have 50mm caliber stays, and you have a bunch of ammo types. You have armor piercing, high explosive, heat. Heat with fins now. High velocity armor piercing, discarding sabo, all this other stuff. Hesh. ATGMs, APFSDS, smoke even. You know, smoke is actually white phosphorus in this, so it hits stuff and lights stuff on fire. Just don't sign up for any of those Geneva conventions and stuff and you'll be fine. But yeah. I'm just going to go with high explosive. That's a pretty good round for anti-infantry, which is pretty useful in the game mode. Going to get a size box here, and that's a lot of rounds. Just going to put it in the turret. So, here's the thing with ammo placement. With manual loading guns, it doesn't really matter where the ammo is placed if you just want it to load. It'll load it from anywhere. The loader dudes, they'll like go and get it. However, if it's closer to the breach, it'll load faster if it's a manual loading gun. At least if it's like within like 2 feet or so of it, which is like 25. I think it's 25 units exactly in this. So just keep it within that range of the breach, and you'll be fine. Going a bit further, it will increase the range. But with auto loaders, they're a little picky on the placement. So if you have a carousel loader, which means you don't have a magazine for it and you're at Cold War and up, you basically need to have the ammo in the turret, or if the gun is in the hull, then you need the ammo to be also in the hull, and that'll work. But if you have it in a magazine loader, like, let me get one of those out. weaponry, autoloader magazines, small. So yeah, if I have one of these, there we go. If I have one of these, this thing has to be in the turret, but then the ammo can be anywhere. And let me just get one of these just to show you how those work, since carousels are kind of simple. They just have the ammo in it and it just works. But yeah, I gotta link this to the autoloader, and that should work. And then I can put the ammo, like, anywhere. I'm gonna put the ammo beside the gearbox. Nobody's gonna stop me. Yeah, let me parent that on. So, parent the ammo to the gate on the base plate, and that should work. And then you also actually need a base plate gate for the turret gate, and also for the aimer. There we go, I'm expanding complexity very rapidly, aren't I? So yeah, just put the gate on the base plate, put one on the aimer, and here's what we do. Those are basically just determining, like, what you're parenting stuff to, if you've heard of that term before, just kind of like what controls the rotation of the other stuff. So like if I parent this to the base plate here, it moves with this, like it's just solid stuck to it. And if I want the gun to go where this thing is pointing, then it does that. And yeah, that's pretty much all you need. So next up, I made a thing where you don't actually have to do a bunch of constraints on the turrets and the aimer and all that. It's actually pretty simple. Much like how you don't even have to spawn a wheel. But yeah, just wire gun to one of the guns. And there you go, the gun is linked. You don't have to do any constraints for the gun. And since I have a turret here, I'm going to wire it to the turret base plate. But yeah, on the gun, remember to actually wire it to the gun, not an aimer. Just the gun, not the aimer. That's kind of important. And yeah, now I just wire camera trace to the camera controller, trace output. Lock is turret lock. I'm just going to put it to third person, since that's an actual default toggle. I think it's on control. Camera trace 2 and active 2 is for if you have a second camera, like if you were building like a commander machine gun or something like that. I don't have that here, so I don't really need it. But yeah, if you did have a second cam controller somewhere and a second pod controller, that's what you'd do. It would just be linked to a different seat that somebody else could get into. But yeah, active to active on this, and there you go. Now here's the funny thing too, is this actually allows me to get into it and start turning. Now, I would say that if I'd actually gave myself any degree of rotation on the limits of the turret controller, which it itself has a bunch of settings. Yeah, elevation limits, I just kind of want to give it, let's say, 45 degrees of looking up, 15 degrees of looking down, a full 360 rotation in both directions. Rotation speed, keeping it at 1.0 or like whatever its max can be. You can lower it if you want the rotation speed a little lower for whatever reason, maybe lowering cost or getting historical stuff, whatever. Features here, is this a fixed gun? No, it's on a turret. Fixed gun wouldn't even be a casemate. Fixed gun is like if you don't have the gun rotated at all, it's just sitting somewhere. Some people have a use for it. We don't in this case. Shortstop stabilizer. This is a World War II era stabilizer that reduces sway from like when you stop or go forward, and also just adds some stability to it. Full stabilizer is like it's fully stable. This thing is like solid where you want it to go to. And then fire control system is like it leads and calculates drop for the position you want to shoot at just by pointing at it. It's point and click. Just going to keep it simple right now, none of that stuff. You can set it to load at a set angle. We don't really need to do that right now, but like if you did turn that on and you just want it to load at like say 90 degrees or so, there you go. But yeah, we don't need that. Quadrant based limits is like if you have really specific elevation and depression depending on where you're pointing the gun. Once again, we don't. And idle elevation, you can just set the idle elevation to like a default value when it's inactive. But yeah, we don't need that here. So this should be pretty much done on the turret. Oh yeah, other thing before I even spawn it. So you remember this other crew member dude? He is he's gonna be the gunner. Just right click him. Well, regular click him, then right click on the turret controller, and he'll be the guy who shoots that gun. Well, not really shoot it, he just like controls where the turret points. And oh yeah, the other thing too, so you can have this guy being in the hull, and he'll be like controlling the turret as a remote weapon system. However, remote weapon systems are like Cold War and up, and this is like a World War II vehicle at the moment, so he can't actually control the gun from where he's at. So what I actually need to do is unparent him from the hull, and then parent him to the turret. Don't actually have to move him to the turret, but you know, I did it anyway. If I just freeze him. Just... Wow, I am really messing up right now. Which direction is forward on this thing? Oh yeah, forward doesn't even matter with the turret if, like, I didn't have anything on it because of how the thing works. Wow, I really cannot freeze this guy right now. Wait a second, is it actually broke? Oh yeah, because if you unparent a dude, and then you try and reparent it, yeah, parent tool is kind of a joke sometimes. So, let me just get rid of this guy. Gonna go ahead and get a new crew member, and he's gonna be our new gunner. And he's gonna be sitting in this turret. And just parent him onto the turret now that it actually freezes properly. But yeah, what I was saying though is if you unparent somebody and then try to freeze it, for some reason it doesn't work because unparenting stuff tends to mess up the physics. It's a weird thing in Source games, I don't know. But yeah, this guy is now the gunner. Did I not link him? I actually just parented him on and didn't link him. You'll have video evidence to prove it. But yeah, now we got that guy parented on. And, yeah. Oh yeah, another thing too, since I mentioned earlier this camera controller here, the base here is what it's, like, the camera is parented to. I'm gonna actually set it to the turret base. That way it's up there instead of down there. Don't really need to, it's just preference. Oh yeah, you can see the turret is already pointing in the direction we need to go. And if I'm in third person, look at that. See the limits of it when it's going down. And we didn't even have to do any constraints on the turret. And it's really stable. That's all cool and stuff. That suspension. Alright, let's see this thing shoot. I'm clicking, but it is not shooting. And why is it not shooting? That's a good question. So I got the 50mm autoloader. I linked up the... Oh, I didn't wire the fire button. So yeah, back to the drawing board here. This is why I'm going over it as like just like as I'm doing it, just figuring out what's wrong, because there's a lot of small issues that'll pop up, and some of them are really just basic. It's just like, oh, didn't wire the fire button, you know. Oh yeah, anyway, I should probably go over these. Fire is pretty obvious. Swap ammo. If you have a bunch of different ammo types, you can swap between them by pressing a button. Like, I usually set it to R, but you can do whatever with it. Reload will reload the magazine if it's a gun that uses a magazine or not. Just press the button and it'll go into this reload cycle. Indicator determines where, like, ATGMs coming from this gun will point at. By default, it uses the gun itself. But if you're doing more fancy stuff, maybe you want it to be on, like, a commander gun that controls it, or, like, a camera somewhere, or, like, a hologram or something even, I don't know. Fuse delay. If you have, like, a fuse for, like, HE or smoke launchers or something like that, you can set it to a certain number and then input this number here, and it'll blow up in that time. But yeah, now that I got the fire control wired up to this, yeah, I can actually just click the button. And it doesn't fire. Probably because I didn't even copy this over. Didn't need the right click on that. So yeah. Okay, so now we actually have information popping up because everything on this thing is mostly done. It's kind of expensive. Probably because it rotates super fast and has super fast speed. But yeah, The gun rotates, and the turret. Yeah, the gun actually shoots. That is a rapid fire gun. So what happens when you have an auto-loading magazine on? Nice. Alright. So that's pretty much it for when it comes to doing any of this stuff. I guess I could mention turret motors. Turret motors, you just kind of put one on, then you link it to one of the turret controllers, and that'll make it rotate a lot faster, or well, a certain amount faster based off of the rotation boost that it says it gives you there. But we really don't need one, given how this thing doesn't have any armor yet. And I probably could just extend this tutorial and go into armor too. That would be kind of useful. Though I guess armoring is kind of like complicated. Like it's a lot to it, really. But let me give you some of the basics real quick. So we have 3 armor types, like main armor types, and then there's also composite types. So I'll start with armor. You have RHA, that's your basic armor. That's like just default standard armor. It's nothing special really about it. It's just like, here's, you set it to 50 millimeters, it is 50 millimeters of protection. Cast armor here, it's basically armor that's cheaper. So like if you're worrying about costs, this is good to have. But it also isn't actually worse if you use it at higher thicknesses, except for it still creates more spalling even at higher thicknesses, which is kind of bad considering the more thick something is, the worse the spalling out of it gets. So it can become like basically a bomb in your armor if you don't happen to have a good spall liner. But it is cheap, and also if it's too thin, it'll actually be worse than the armor protection that it states. Like, let's actually look at some plates here, since you can just do that for quickly determining armor. So if I were to just set this at 50 millimeters RHA, and if I set this at 50 millimeters cast, so we can read here, looking down at it, that's 50 millimeters versus AP and everything else. If I look over here, this is only 42 point whatever millimeters versus all those things. And the thinner it gets, the worse it gets. After you get to about 150, though, it's pretty much equal. In fact, about closer to that, it's basically equal. So I just recommend thick plates with cast. Now, high hardness armor is even more complex. It says it right here in detail. Let's read that out. Heat-treated RHA armor brought to higher hardness values. It provides increased armor protection against shells that are approximately 60% of the thickness of the armor, but is weaker against shells above this amount. This increase or decrease scales with the difference in thickness versus diameter. It also has high ductility, which is making it explode pretty much like how cast does, and it's also more expensive than RHA, which makes you question why would you use it, except for it is actually pretty good against stuff like APFSDS and other more advanced rounds, at least if you're using like thicker armor amounts. So like, let's say I had 150 millimeters of armor, and right now I'm against the 150 millimeter shell because you can set it here in the armor value. So yeah, shell says it's 150 millimeters, and versus AP it's less armor, but versus the APFSDS, which is actually a sub-caliber round that's like 25% of that, and HVAP, which is like 50% of 150, it's actually higher. And if I were to go against something like, say, a 120 millimeter cannon firing its APFSDS, this 150 millimeter plate is nearly 200 millimeters of protection versus APFSDS. So yeah, it's okay, I guess. Pretty useful situation. And next up, let's just go over composites real quick. So we got a bunch of different composites types. It's got concrete, era, steel, brew, and textilite. Concrete's World War II, it says it right there. If you use something over the era, then it puts you at that era minimum. Yeah, so we got Cold War stuff, modern stuff. And yeah, here's the density of it. And the thing about composites is that they're a little different. Instead of just setting the armor value like we showed you a second ago, it's based on the thickness of the block. So you actually need an actual composite brick to give you some composite protection. So if I were to have this here, here's a brick of composite, and I want something that's going to protect against nothing. okay, no, I want something that's going to protect against stuff. So, Steel Brew is pretty dense. It's really heavy, kind of, but it's actually low cost. Steel Brew is mostly like cast armor and some other stuff, so it's not really that expensive. But it offers a bit more heat protection than just regular cast armor would, and it isn't really as explosive. Well, not really explosive, but it doesn't have as bad spall. And it stays cheap. So I'm just going to go ahead and set Steel Brew up here. Just click it, and then I'm going to link it to the Tankcore. And yeah, so now it says something here about the Composite Armor hit pool is set. Yeah, if I want to add more to this, I'm going to have to tell it to not override the composite list, which is a button right there. But if I did want to override the composite list, like I don't want this thing to be a composite anymore, and I just want to get rid of it, then I can just go and turn override back on and tell something else to be a composite. You can also press R, that's the reload button, but you can click on the Tankcore itself, like just left click, and it'll select all the current composites. And then I press R to select them. But yeah, that's pretty much all you need out of that. Oh yeah, if I have nothing selected and then I right click on it, doesn't actually do anything. So yeah. At least I think it didn't. Button, right? Yeah, didn't do anything. So it's all good. So now we have this piece of Steel Brew on the front of this thing, which is going to bring it up to modern era for this one little brick in front of some of the fuel. Barely in front of some of the fuel. And there we go. Now it's a little more expensive. And it's not considered a modern tank. Probably because this isn't... Probably because I didn't parent it on. I'm really forgetting to do that. It's been a while. But yeah, any armor and stuff you add to a vehicle, you're going to need to parent it on to the vehicle on the spot where you want it to be. Like if I had turret armor, I'm going to parent it to the turret thing over there. Probably at some later point I'll actually build a real armored tank and show that off. So yeah, now we got this brick here. It's now considered a modern tank. You can see it in the scanner tool there. And on the little information scanner, if you can tell what that blob of stuff is, you can see a little red brick above where the fuel tank is. And there we go. We have a functional vehicle that can drive around and fire HE at stuff. Oh yeah, by default, all DakTank stuff with auto tread is actually amphibious. Yeah, look at that feature. Yeah, you can make it amphibious by just lowering the buoyancy of the base plate if you really don't want to float on water. But yeah, it's just that S-props by default are buoyant. And that pretty much does it. I think that's pretty much everything I need to tell you about how to get a working vehicle. I've went over like all this junk. Yeah, if you have any other questions or stuff about specific stuff, there's like this big guide that I included that has a bunch of text on a bunch of information, like the basics, armor, all this other armor stuff, like every single ammo type, some weaponry components, critical hits. Yeah, it goes over it in pretty good detail. Pretty sure most of this is accurate. Looks accurate. I didn't read it, but I wrote it. And yeah, that should do it. Oh, I forgot the sound replacer. Yeah, just making sure I check it over at the last second. So right click on something with the sound replacer. It'll tell you the standard engine, whatever. If you want to replace an engine, you can go to the sounds of stuff, go to DakTanks and engine. You can set it to any of these other engine types. Just copy it to the clipboard, and then in the first sound box, paste it in. And then you press set sound, and there you go. Now it's sound replaced with a turbine, which, yeah, there you go. You can hear it. Yeah. So now that's a turbine engine sound. And then for guns, guns are actually set up in a way where they have, by default, they have just one basic sound, but you can actually set them up to have like 3 sounds that randomly play. So if I wanted to have cannons. I look into the cannons file under new. This actually gives me a lot of different sounds. We got a bunch of gun sounds. Like, let's say I want this cannon sound. Yeah, sounds alright. So I'm going to copy that to clipboard, paste it, paste it, paste it. And I remember it said 2 and 3 on these ones. So now I have 3 different sounds that are kind of similar sounding, but are all different. So now when I fire, it's going to be a different sound, which sounds pretty nice usually. At least it should. But yeah. Didn't even let it do the little armor tool before I unfroze it, so it looks all messed up now. But yeah, now we got a turbine sounding V12 and our gun that sounds like this. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Armoring, I guess, was not really a whole lot to it. You just kind of put the armor onto it however you want it to look like, set the armor value to what you want it to look like, and then you just parent it onto the hull or the turret. It's not really complex, I guess, at the basics. I mean, the problem about armor is just it gets kind of complex if you're really trying to design it to do a specific thing. Which is kind of the point of the mod, I guess, is just designing a vehicle to do a specific thing. So, it gets kind of interesting. Maybe later I'll go into like a tutorial on how to do like more advanced armor against certain things in particular, and like building towards like a certain cost. And that way people could maybe design vehicles very competently, I guess. Oh yeah, other thing I guess I should look at is Tankcore itself. You can set your vehicle name to something like Tutorial Tank. Yeah. Also, you can do stuff like, what do you want the turret launch chance to be on when it blows up? Yeah, by default it's like a 1/3. And also you can make it explode up like super high, 100% of the time. Or not at all if you didn't want your turret to blow off when it dies. If you're boring or something, I guess. But yeah. You can also tell it if you want it to be Cold War or modern if you don't otherwise have something that's Cold War or modern, which has some benefits because some rounds, like say a heat round for example, in Cold War is better than a heat round from World War II. And ATGMs in modern era are better than Cold War ATGMs. But if you're already modern, it doesn't do anything because you can't force Cold War if you're already modern. And also there's active protection systems. You can enable it. And this will shoot down like slow-moving like RPGs and some like slow-moving shells that are coming at you, usually heat and stuff. And you can determine how many shots it has, up to 20 if it should protect the front, sides, rear, and like what the minimum caliber it should be shooting at is. This actually also costs some money when you're doing the vehicle. Like if I have 20 and it's protecting all the sides and it's enabled and all that, that's kind of an expensive APS system, and I'll show you now. So you can see here, this one here is a 20 point tank, and this one is like 80 because I'm protecting like all sides, front, side, rear of 20 rounds, which is like, so each side you protect is like 1 on the multiplier. So like if you just front times 1 for your rounds, if you're front and side times 2, if you're front, side, rear times 3 for each of the rounds you have. So yeah, use it sparingly. Honestly, I usually just put it on like the sides, maybe the rear, and only a few rounds. Just like have enough so it protects you against a shot that you weren't really looking out for, but not just like relying on it entirely, because usually you can just use regular armor in that case. Oh yeah, sometimes when you spawn stuff in Gmod, it makes this fire sound. Just type stop sound in console and that goes away. But yeah, I think this tutorial is pretty much long enough. I already said what other stuff I'll probably do in tutorials later. You pretty much got all the information on a bunch of smaller stuff. And then there's the guide here if you really want more information. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So yeah, new tutorial, done. And I'll come out probably with some public release vehicles later so people can mess with those if they can't build their own tank or just want to test something out that's done. So yeah. Bye, everybody. That's it for now. See you later.